Welcome to the debut episode of Stories in Cyber, the ISACA New Jersey podcast. Founded in 1969, ISACA, which stands for Information Systems Audit and Control Association, has been a global force dedicated to advancing the realms of information governance, risk management, and cybersecurity. Here's the thing. ISACA is more than just a global organization. It's a global community. And we're not just a name. We're a network of like-minded professionals consisting of local chapters with tailored resources that empower individuals and businesses. So whether you're in the heart of New Jersey or halfway across the world in New Delhi, you are not too far from the support and opportunities that ISACA chapters can provide. In this episode, we want to dive into what you can expect from Stories in Cyber, and to give you a glimpse into our podcast mission. We'll share our goals, introduce you to our fascinating guests, and provide a sneak peek at the topics we'll explore in the episodes to come. So without further ado, let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the show. I hope everyone is doing well. Today with us are our hosts, Adnan Rafiq and myself, Evgeny Baranovsky, as well as a very special guest, Ed Kobis, who is an audit and risk professional in the New Jersey chapter of ISACA. Ed, how are you? And why don't you elaborate for us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Definitely a pleasure to speak to you all today. Just to give you, a little bit of background on my experience, I've been working in IT risk audit and compliance now for about 13 years. I started actually in public accounting, worked in the financial side, but over the next couple of years working there, I actually was a little bit more interested in the IT side. Some of my coursework in my MBA program had a lot of IT assurance in it. So I wound up switching into the IT practice and going from starting to study for my CPA into starting to study for my CISA. From there, I worked in multiple different companies, Fortune 500 companies, in multiple different levels of defense, primarily starting in internal audit, then working my way through the risk management organization, as well as actually for the last couple companies, private companies that I worked for, working as part of the IT organization to help them with their risk and compliance activities. Most recently, I actually work back in public accounting with Grant Thornton, where I work in the IT risk advisory practice. And my primary areas of focus still in the internal audit, but I'm also, another component of my career has been SOX. Risk, internal control, compliance. So throughout my career, I've really built kind of a skill set of looking at all the different areas of risk and control that you could look at within an organization. And now I get to apply that with the clients that I work with. Again, a wide range of different types of engagements. I may be called in to do risk assessments. I may be called in to build out internal audit practices for our clients. And in a lot of cases too, I'm brought in when they have to do SOX work, right? A lot of companies do outsource some of these functions in order to have, professionals come in who, are seasoned in this. Maybe they don't have the experience. Maybe they're new to the public realms. They just did an IPO, so they'll bring us in to help them get them up to speed from a SOX perspective. And yeah, so again, happy to be here.
Nice, nice. Fairly wide background. Very excited to talk to you. What would you say when it comes to our lines of defense in your profession? Would you say are or what they look like?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's something that I use when I talk to clients, and I've used throughout my career working internally as well. Lines of defense, when we talk about that, right? We're referring to primarily controls, right? And so the activities that take place within an organization. Obviously, if you're thinking about SOX, that's primarily financial reporting risk, right? Or if you're thinking about risk management or internal audit, there's multiple different types of risks that companies have to try to mitigate as much as possible, right? And so we talk about lines of defense because those are kind of like your three gates before, it becomes a real issue, right? And sometimes we have to do things to help mitigate risk before it actually happens. And so that's why we have to consider internal controls at multiple different levels, right? And so, for the first defense, right? The first line of defense is really the individuals who work within the function itself. It can be within a business area, finance area. But again, my primary focus happens to be in the IT space, right? So, that would be individuals who work within the IT organization. They may be somebody who is either indirectly or directly related with actually performing and executing controls or with certain functions, right? And so we call that the first line of defense because that's really the person, they're the first eyes on something, right? And that's somebody who can catch something if they have the ability to right at the start. So it doesn't even have to come to fruition, right? And there's a lot of different things that they can do, as far as helping to mitigate risk, even as the first person to do it, right? We have a lot of preventative and detective measures that come into play. Once you move past that, then you go into the second line, right? This is the first set organization outside of the direct area that's impacted. And in a lot of companies, that tends to be risk management, right? And a risk management function is typically engaged to help many of the different areas of a company to identify and set what the specific risks are that they have to look towards. And not to say that individuals in IT aren't necessarily aware of outside factors, but the risk management organization, they specialize in kind of keeping all of those considerations in effect, right? And they can help an IT, a finance organization to identify, hey, you guys have this really good, but have you considered these risks? Have you considered this regulation? Let's come up with a plan of how we want to try to work out mitigation factors for that, right? And a lot of times too, these functions, this is where we start to get into the assessment, review, testing, all that. In the first line of defense, they're not going to be necessarily testing per se, but you may have people reviewing someone's work that they do. Here in the second line of defense, they'll actually do certain risk assessments. I think typically a term that's used a lot is the RCSA, or risk and control self-assessment, right? That's when the organization may fill out a questionnaire or form to help the risk management area identify certain factors that they need to consider so that they can help that team to pinpoint certain risk and maybe identify areas where they need to do a little bit more work, right? So that's a second line of defense. That's another way to catch something. So if someone misses something in the first line, you have that second line of defense that can help, right? Then we talk about the third line, right?
Mhm.
Third line is really that should be the catch-all, right? That should be where we, if things have gone through, where we can actually help to ensure once and for all that we're addressing everything that we need to. Typically for a lot of organizations, this is the internal audit function, right? There may be a separate independent compliance, SOX, or other type of compliance function that helps to actually do testing and do real time, or to do reviews over the functions that they're looking at, right? And so this is, and I use the term independent, right? Because this is somebody that has fresh eyes, somebody who's not in the details of everyday life, right? I can't tell you how many times, if I lose something in the house, right, and I'm looking for hours and hours, and I'll say, hey, I lost my glasses, and my wife will find it in 5 minutes, right? Because she hasn't been in the details of it all, whereas I have. So sometimes it's good to have your internal audit function there so that they have the ability to maybe think about things that you didn't look and actually test, right? And so I think that's a key. It's a key function because it helps to identify issues. Internal audit reports, and here's the other thing too. Internal audit is really the first major reporting aspect here because ultimately, too, internal audit is engaged by the company to report to management, right? Companies
Mhm.
want to make sure that their processes are working. If there's any holes or any gaps, that they're able to identify them to address them. I know sometimes auditors are kind of seen as, the ones who poke around, right? But they're actually helping the company to identify things so that, um, you know, they can help to prevent issues before they really happen,
Right.
right?
To become proactive, right? So
Exactly.
let's pause here, right? Because I really appreciate you broken down into three phases, which is
Mhm.
like I've never heard of. We did not have any guest who walked us through. Really appreciate it. So I want to emphasize more on the second line of defense because
Mhm.
first line is like maybe an IT operation or first people doing typical technical work. But second line for defense, you're talking about where the risk get involved and look at the holistic overall risk to the organization. So I wanted to know and curious about what's your perspective? What have you seen when it comes to cloud? Companies are adopting the cloud. So can you tell us a little bit about that? The risk for the cloud security.
Yeah, no, that's a great one, right? Because, even in the work that I do right now, right, a lot of companies are moving to not just cloud, but to SaaS solutions, right, or software as a service. Um, and basically, what that means is a lot of companies are taking their on-premise machines and they're moving them into the cloud, or they're using the third party to help mitigate having to manage those services on site, right? And that can be a really good thing for a company because it can help them to save on costs. It can help them to manage their IT departments better. And it also gives them the opportunity to have more readily available resources via cloud space, right? And you have a lot of the big players that come into effect, right? You know, Azure, you have AWS, and I think that as an IT auditor, I don't think there's a single engagement over the last year or two that hasn't had hosted services like that, right? And so, one of the big things that we have to constantly consider, right, is ensuring that we've captured the environment correctly and that we understand, which software um, is applicable for whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, right? I
Right.
think another piece of it though too is understanding the relationship that the company has with the vendor, right? And a lot of walkthroughs that we've had recently have identified that sometimes they don't necessarily classify all of the different um, pieces of infrastructure that are housed in which cloud service, right? They don't necessarily understand the type of contract that they have,
Right.
whether or not they can actually make changes or whether they're fully reliant, right? Because there's some
Right.
vendors where they do change or they
Yeah, there
have
is
the
no, yeah, I totally agree with you. I've seen firsthand myself with the vendor risk management in those, man, there are so many gray areas, even your third party, maybe using another third party, so it's like a nest. It's supply
right.
chain and all that, and we can spend an hour just to work on the issues. So you mentioned a good point on the findings and the phase two, and you also elaborated on the phase three. And I like the idea of people who don't do the day to day, and you need a separate set of eyes where we talk about internal auditor, and it goes beyond that. That you have external auditor. So can you
Yep.
touch base a little bit? How often do they come back on the findings and the remediation? How does it work? And specifically, you talk about SOX, which is specifically the financials. I also want to add one more question on top of that, if you have time. How these timelines work is the SOX work is as a different regulatory requirement if we have time. But again, just walk us through about the following them with you guys on the remediation and all those, and how often do they do it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, it's actually something that I'm going through right now as we're starting to close out the 2023 calendar year, right? Most of my clients, as many others out there are, their year end is at 12/31, and anybody who works in SOX, it's all based off of the calendar year, right? And so, right this week we have a couple clients that are filing. We have identified issues within some of these, some of them small, some of them large, right? one thing that we do pretty extensively is, because I'm in the advisory practice, I'm engaged sort of as an extension of the company. So we work directly with the client to go through and start documenting out the remediation plans. And then what we do is we work pretty extensively with the external auditors, right? Ensuring that we reconcile the issues. If there's certain things that come about from their work that maybe we aren't testing or it's not in scope for us, we still document that. We know that because ultimately, in a couple of months, we're coming back and we're starting the SOC cycle all over again, right? And, we make it an effort that, the one thing that we do right from the beginning is let's open that page back up from last year and let's look at the issues that we found, right?
Mm-hmm.
We set an expectation both with external audit and with our clients to ensure that, how long do you need to fix the issue? And then we follow up with them at that point in time to say, how are you doing with it, right? Because ultimately, it's our responsibility to say, hey, listen, they're going to look at this again next year, right?
Right.
External audit. And if you don't fix it, it's going to come back again.
Yep.
So, it's pretty prudent of us to make sure that we stay on top of them. We're also being engaged to provide a service of helping them to ensure that you know that their SOX program is running smoothly. So for us, it's part of the service to make sure that when we go back, those issues are remediated, right? And you know I- the one thing I will say is that there's certain aspects where we have to be careful, right? Because we still have to maintain a level of independence. So, depending upon the engagement, if we're engaged to do like a SOX implementation or a more of a consulting type work, we can have a little bit more say in what they can do in order to actually implement controls that can remediate or that can fix the issue. In a SOX capacity, acting as like an internal audit agent, we do have to be careful. We can give suggestions as far
Mm-hmm.
as what we've seen, right? And basically what we expect the end result to be. And then we would work with them to say, okay, what have you got for us? We review it and then we let them know this is good, maybe this needs to be changed, right? But they
Right.
still are the ones who are coming up with it.
So before we switch on to the topic, I have one more question, which I prefer try to ask in every conversation, is around challenge. Is the technical challenge? Is the people's challenge? What you have seen? Like what do you come across the most?
The people. The people are typically the biggest challenge, right?
Uh,
Um, Especially when you're working with individuals, because you got to remember, right? When we come in to do audit, SOX work, internal audit, they're not dealing with us every single day of the year, right? They're
mm-hmm.
dealing with us for like a small portion of the year. And we're asking them a lot of questions. We're asking them to go above and beyond the
Right.
normal course of their work, right? And throughout my career, I mean, I've definitely had those, and the vast majority are, they get it. They're happy to help because they know it's going to help the organization.
Ed, thank you so much for the high level overview in the IT audit and risk world. I really appreciate you breaking down the three lines of defense. And if I was part of the audience that was looking to learn about this profession, what I'd be doing is watching this podcast, pausing and taking down notes of some of the terms you've used. I think you broke it down very well. I appreciate it. What I want to know now is more about you. Outside of your professional life, what are some things that you like to do on your own time?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're busy people, but we all have lives outside of this, right? So I spend a lot of time with my wife and my daughter, who's turning 8 couple weeks. With her, she's got a lot of activities. She's in second grade, so there's a lot of stuff going on. Um, but the one thing that I do find to be pretty important is, as part of my job is to help my clients, as a citizen of, my community, I do find it very beneficial and rewarding to also give back to the community whenever possible. And I know that that could sometimes be a daunting and challenging concept and something hard to do, but my wife and I particularly just find it very important to give back in certain ways that we can. And she's involved in a bunch of different organizations. A lot of my focus area happens to be on the local Jewish community center that my wife and I have belonged to now for about 5 years now. My daughter went to preschool there, and then, now that she's out of it, we've just still developed a good connection with it. And, we feel it's important to continue to give back and to help in any way, shape, and form. And it kind of happened accidentally, but I had a conversation with a friend of mine who also works in the cybersecurity space. And he mentioned to me, he's like, oh, wow, you'd be a really good fit we have a committee called the Safety and Security Committee. And I was like, well, I'm not a security person. He's like, but you're an IT person and you look at risk and controls. And that's something that we don't have currently, right? And he was like, let me put it to you like this. We've bought equipment over the last 5 years that we haven't been able to use because we haven't upgraded any of our servers in 20 years. And I was like, yeah, I'd be interested to take a look at that, sure. So they brought me on, and we've it's been a very rewarding experience, and gotten to know even more people. And just recently I was added to the budget and finance committee because they recognize that there's such a need and there's such a gap in their understanding around IT that they want to start considering capital projects to help um, revise and update a lot of the infrastructure. And they never had anybody before who had the skill set to be able to look at certain things and make recommendations. And I do think that there's a lot of work to do, and it's a new path for me. But I'm really excited about the last year or two that I've actually really been more heavily involved with the organization. And yeah, so it's been great.
Yeah, I could definitely agree. Giving back and getting involved with organizations is definitely rewarding. Part of how I got involved with this podcast in the first place. So yeah, and thank you for your contributions to that. I really appreciate it. Um, what advice would you give someone who wants to get into IT audit and risk?
It's a great question, because ironically enough, thinking back to when I started in my career, I think um, most people when they graduate, I did an MBA in accounting, so the natural path was to go straight into audit or tax, right? So I picked audit. But as I went through, I think curiosity is something that um, I'm just a very curious person, right? I ask
Mhm.
questions. I'm very inquisitive, right? And accounting, you could do that, but also accounting has a certain strict set of rules, right? Whereas, I think when our risk assurance, our IT auditors would always come into the audit room, back in the day when they all stuck us in the closet, inside, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I would hear them come in and I'd be like, wow, like they're really like looking at something and being creative and thinking outside the box and looking at, they're not following necessarily a set level of rules that if A plus B doesn't equal C, then everything's not okay. So that's why, so what I would suggest to people looking to come into this space is A, be curious, right? And don't be afraid to ask questions. Like if you are interested in it, reach out to somebody in your company. And it can, even if you work internally, right? Not necessarily for public accounting. Public accounting, it's a little bit easier because you can always reach out to somebody in the IT risk assurance group. You can always reach out to somebody in advisory. In advisory practices, they typically have more niche areas like cybersecurity, um, implementation groups, finance transformation, where you can kind of tag along. But even internally, you can reach out to somebody in the IT organization or in the the CISO's office, information security, and say, hey, can you explain a little bit more about what you do and, what you worry about, and that's another thing too, is ask them tough questions like, what do you worry about when you come to work? Like things that keep you up at night. I
Yeah,
want to understand.
I find that people who love what they do have no problem
Exactly.
sharing and just talking, and sometimes you might have trouble getting them to shut up.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important. Not very, very few people say no when you ask them, hey, can I shadow you for a day? Or can you just tell me a little bit more about what you do? throw 30 minutes on a calendar, grab lunch or coffee with somebody. Plus, also, too, it's great networking, right? And that's another thing. Not just considering the informational or the knowledge aspect of it, but even career wise, right? Because to me, when somebody comes to me and maybe we need some junior level help, especially where I am, I had somebody who reached out to me a couple months ago. They're a finance advisory person. They wanted to start doing a little bit of SOX IT work. So an opportunity came up, and I thought of them because I was like, you know what, I'm really impressed that somebody had the um, had the desire to learn more and to want to get involved and try something new. Let me try them, right? And I'm not going to give them the super technical stuff, but it's still a good learning opportunity, right? And that could mean a career shift for them, and really excite them. It's what was done for me when I started out, and I've been doing this now for over a decade. So, and I'm not planning on changing. So,
Nice. And Ed, I could tell what you're saying is true because when we reached out to you to have you on this podcast, you came at us with open arms. So we really appreciate you having you on this show. You gave us a lot of valuable information for us and for our listeners. Wish I had more time to talk to you. Maybe we'll have another episode in the future where we could dive into some more things. But again, really appreciate having you. Adnan, thank you so much. And I guess we'll wrap it up here. To the listeners, hope that you guys have listened to Ed with an open mind and gotten what you expected from this podcast. We'll be sure to have more guests as experienced as Ed on the show and give you the knowledge that we think is valuable for this industry. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next one. Ciao. Bye, guys.
Yep. Thank you. See you again.
thank you so much.
All right.